One of Claire Cameron's favorite memories is climbing Mount Hood in Oregon. On that day, she was leading a mountaineering trip, standing on a massive volcanic glacier. There are 12 volcanic glaciers on Mount Hood, hulking ice structures, constantly shifting, gleaming in the bright sunshine. It's quite a sight. Claire was training her group in crevasse rescue, a necessary skill in case someone falls into one of the deep cracks in the surface. You gotta be careful out there, but for Claire, it was worth it.
I went about 60 feet down, and there was so much noise under there because there's 1,000 feet of ice that's just slowly rolling down the mountain. And when it gets in the deeper level, a lot of the oxygen has been pushed out. So it was like this bright turquoise. And then it was curved and chipped and angled, and it was creaking and pinging. These bing, just incredible.
Just the way you describe it sounds
It felt
magical.
like a cathedral in a way. It was an incredible place to be.
A cathedral for what sounds like a spiritual experience. Claire has had a lot of them, having communed with nature countless times since she was a little girl. Camping, running, hiking. Basically, if it's outside, she's always been onside. Then, at 45, she was diagnosed with an aggressive genetic mutation of skin cancer, melanoma. That's when her doctor effectively told her not to go outside in direct sunlight again for the rest of her life.
The first thing I did was I started laughing. I got that weird cackle.
Is that like a nervous
Just sort
laugh?
and then I said, oh, no, but this is me. Because being in the outdoors and all the things I love to do, like mountaineering, canoeing, an aluminum canoe on a shiny lake, they're all activities that necessarily involves exposure to UV. So when he said that, my entire life turned inside out. All I wanted to do was get in a canoe and paddle away.
Over the years, the great outdoors had become Claire's identity. It was who she was, and now that was being stripped away. How could she replace a whole life with a new one? This is Carry the Fire, a podcast by the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation, featuring inspiring, personal stories about what happens when world-leading doctors, researchers, and their patients come together to ignite breakthroughs in cancer diagnostics, research, and treatment. This is a podcast about innovation and radical hope. I'm your host, Lisa Laflamme. In this episode, my conversation with award-winning author and novelist Claire Cameron about grieving the loss of the life you once knew and reinventing an identity because of cancer. Part of Claire Cameron's reckoning with melanoma was to write a memoir entitled How to Survive a Bear Attack. The book centers on the true story of two campers killed by a black bear in Algonquin Park. The brutal nature of the attack in that beautiful place serves as a metaphor for Claire's cancer journey. It also serves, in part, as the basis for our conversation. She'll read a couple of passages from the book in a little bit. And by the way, I loved it and learned so much about Claire, cancer, and bears. If you get the chance, I hope you'll read it. Claire's relationship with the great outdoors actually began with the loss of another pivotal relationship.
I go way back to when I was 9 years old, and my father was diagnosed with melanoma, skin cancer, and it went metastatic, and he ended up dying, I guess, just after I turned 10, and it was a horrible death. So it was in the 80s. There's been so many advances in cancer treatment since then.
How was that for you, though, as a 10-year-old girl? Did death even mean anything to you, or just
I think
the void?
It did because he came home towards the end of his life to die at home, and he was 6'5". He touched down to about 100 pounds, and he'd lost his hair, and he had big glasses. He was like sort of a bookish university professor. And I just remember they kept slipping down, his nose. And then he died in our home. So I understood the permanence of that, which I think I'm probably 10 years old, you often do, but it was very difficult. And I went numb, I think.
And from that loss grows a passion for you.
Yes.
For the outdoors.
So when I really woke up and when I really started to connect to other people, I went on a canoe trip with an organization called Outward Bound on the White River, which feeds into Lake Superior. And it was 30 days and it was just incredible. I made such good friends. I think when you have like wet socks and you've burned the dinner, if people still talking to you at the end of the day, they're your real soulmates. So I woke up to the people around me, but also to the power of the outdoors. And I remember being on Lake Superior on these huge rollers in a canoe. And they were just so big that the canoe next to us would like disappear down in a trough and then be way up above our heads. It was just an incredible thing. And when I came home from that trip, I decided that was for me. And I pursued the outdoors in any way, shape, or form. So I started rock climbing and I started going out west and climbing mountains.
Climbing mountains and volcanoes, hiking, skiing, and paddling bubbling rivers of white water. Claire met her husband on that glacier on Mount Hood. They had 2 boys in 2005 and 2008. Then, in 2018, weeks after a family camping trip in Algonquin Park, she received some bad news. The results of a biopsy of a small black spot on her shoulder.
I had skin cancer. And my surgeon, who's at Princess Margaret, said, I think we should get you tested for genetics. Given your family history, my father and I have an uncle who'd had melanoma as well. So I was tested and I have a mutation of my CDKN2A gene.
The test offered a level of precision Claire might not have received at other hospitals.
It means basically the cell replication cycle in me doesn't stop like it does in other people. So it's almost like an immunity, a protection.
That's when a doctor gave her a clearer picture of what she was facing. At that moment, I'd love if you wouldn't mind to read that section.
Oh, yeah.
I was just so moved by that passage and the clarity and honesty of your conversation.
In our first meeting, my dermatologist picked up on my tendency to Google. He asked if I knew about the survival rates for people with melanoma, and I had them memorized. I liked the odds. I rattled them off. At my stage, more than 95% of people with melanoma were still alive after 5 years. He shook his head. None of those statistics apply to you, he said. It was more likely that genetics would dictate the course of my disease. For you, the surgeon said, the ideal exposure to UV light is none. I asked Dr. Reimagining how, short of becoming nocturnal, I should avoid UV light. It's impossible, he said, but you have to aim in that direction.
That must have been a shattering moment.
So I remember that so well.
Because you felt that getting in the canoe and paddling away was going to separate you from reality, or?
It's about I remember my small size. When you're somewhere like Algonquin Park, where I love to be, you're in these vast, there's thousands of lakes and rivers and trees, and you just realize that you're this sort of small thing on this large, beautiful planet. And a place like that is going to go on and on for many years beyond you, thousands and millions. And so it just reminds me, it gives me sort of a humility, I think. And then he says, that's the one thing you shouldn't do. And then I got a little bit indignant and I wanted to speak to the manager. I was like, no, it's me. I'll need to be going out, as if he could issue me a pass.
I wanted to speak to the manager.
Yeah.
I don't accept this.
And I still am sometimes oh no, come on, that's a joke, isn't it? It just doesn't feel real, but it is. Yeah.
You get the diagnosis. How quickly and what do they actually have to do
Stage 1 was an operation. So they took a lymph node to see if it had spread, because melanoma starts on your skin on the surface and it burrows in. And it can be very fast moving. So I have invasive melanoma. Like, I remember the first spot I found on my shoulder was black and it changed almost before my eyes. It can go within 6 weeks. It can become deadly.
How challenging was the treatment then?
My doctor treated it very seriously right away.
Claire was left with 4 big scars on her back, but the surgery itself was successful. At the same time, she learned that because of a genetic mutation, the melanoma could and probably would return at some point. It would never fully be cured.
So that was at the point where I started writing. I think what writing this book helped with, so I didn't write it as a cathartic exercise or to like help me or anyone else. I wrote it as a way to sort of distract and I think focus on something outside myself. But actually what it did was that I started to have these, I guess curiosity might be one of the best drivers of like healing in a way, in that it turns you out. I started meeting these wonderful people along the way. I went back to Algonquin Park and I couldn't be there as I was before, but I was with biologists and, people who love the outdoors as much as I do, or people who were involved in this bear attack, who also were spotting birds as we went and that kind of thing. So
and in very practical terms, you were also, wearing the wide-brimmed hat. I'm sure you were slathered in sunblock and
exactly. So I sort of forced myself out there, but I also, and I think I've met so many people in touring with this book that have cancer, and it's such a common experience that you don't feel like yourself. This moment actually that wasn't in the book because I couldn't quite get it right, but it's a little outtake that's perfect. So I was with this guy named Jerry who works at the Outfitters in Algonquin Park, and he was one of the first responders in the bear attack in the 90s. So it was quite a warm day, so the UV was quite high, but we were meeting in the afternoon and he was going to take me out to the island to tell me what he saw. And he was a very outdoorsy person. We bonded like right away over our love for the park. And so he got into his boat and he started it up. And I all of a sudden realized we were going out onto a windy lake. Normally I would have been in a like ball cap that you can just cinch down and it's great in a boat. I realized my hat was going to fly off, and that completely threw me. And I thought, what am I doing? And I just sort of froze. It felt like my hard drive shut down a little, and I was just standing on the dock. And he said, "Are you okay?" And that, for some reason, was just I got into the boat and I said, "You know what? I'm wearing this big stupid hat, and it's because I've had skin cancer and I'm not supposed to go in the sun. And I'm afraid it's going to fly off, but I've realized I can just hang on to it." And I said, sorry, it's just a bit emotional. I really had to explain myself because it was weird. I was weird. And he said, "Well, what do you mean? So you can't go on canoe trips and stuff?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't figured that out." And he went, "Oh, I taught myself."
Oh no.
But it was actually
so real.
Exactly. It was so real. Yeah. He was like,
"That's really helpful, Jerry. Thanks for that."
So weirdly, it was that bit. I was like, Jerry gets it.
Jerry gets it.
That's how I feel like, because a lot of my friends were like, "Oh, just put on some long sleeves. You'll be fine." But Jerry was this like real outdoors person, understood what the kind of trip I did and what exposure's like and how much it was changing. So it was this wonderful, and I was like, you know what, Jerry, thank you. That's very validating.
You needed that.
And then off we went. I hung on to my flappy hat and we were fine.
Did you basically think it was easier to imagine surviving a bear than living inside this invisible danger like cancer?
I think that's exactly. Although that took me, like what you just said, took me about 4 years to be able to articulate. Where were you? But my scars on my back, the slashes on my back sort of looked like, I'd been attacked by something. That's certainly how I felt. But cancer is such a strange disease in the early stages because the disease itself, you don't, like, I didn't feel melanoma, but you do feel the treatment.
Tell me about the eye
Oh.
incident and how much longer after you'd had the 4 removed
Yeah.
did you realize something else is wrong here?
So I think it was 2 years later, I found a little freckle in my eye. It was during the pandemic. Might have been 3 years.
On the eyeball.
So it was between like my iris, the color part, and my nose. So like right halfway in between, it was just a freckle. And I just saw it because I glanced to the side and I was like, wait, what's that? So I had to have do you want to hear about this?
I don't,
This
but
was
there are
like-
listeners who may be interested in the gory details, Claire.
The surgeon said, okay, you can have 2 options. You can either do eye chemo and just assume it's cancer. It's 3 months of like topical treatments and you will hate me. Those were his words because it's very painful and irritating. And of course I write too. So I was like, it doesn't sound like something I'm going to be able to write through. And he said, or we can just take it off and then we can test it and see what it is. And I was like, no brainer, like as if I'm going to go through eye chemo and I might not need to. It just didn't even seem like a question. So I was booked in fairly quickly for the appointment. And I went in, it was, just a day surgery. And so I went in and sat in one of those sort of dentist chairs. And I was like, okay, it's only going to be 20 minutes and I'll be out of there. And then I looked to my left and there's a scalpel on a tray. And
Oh,
yeah, I'm laughing, but it was one of those moments where I was like, what did I think was going to happen? I didn't think.
please tell me they put you under for that.
So I was wide awake because I had to look up and to the side in order, they needed me awake. And I had the most incredible experience of this inner voice telling me to run. It was almost like this loud chatter. And also like, hey, Claire, did you check? This was my inner voice. Did you check the ratings of this doctor? Do you even know what he's like the most esteemed eye surgeon. So they did numb the eye. I felt no pain at all, but I could see the marker come, and I could read the writing on the marker. And I saw like a Q-tip and then a red Q-tip leave. And it was just so. When I left the room, I told my husband I was like watching a horror movie in first person.
Oh my goodness,
Like, it was
wow.
really something.
But the bottom line is, after a few days, you
It
were
was
able
amazing.
and it was cancer.
It was cancer, which was not amazing, but they were able to get it. And now I'm very closely monitored. So I go in every 3 months and it hasn't come back. It was about a year after when the doctors, I guess melanoma can very easily come back. So they're very pleased that it hasn't. We all are.
And how is it for someone like you who has like risk is just part of your life?
Yeah.
And now you see this internal risk is also part of your DNA. You
Yes.
can't control it.
So that, I think, I didn't really know what I was doing when I started pursuing answers about this bear attack and writing this book. But that was what came through, just carefully delineating the difference between what you can control and what you can't, I suppose. And I was able to move to a level of acceptance that I am who I am because of my DNA, and I inherited a lot of traits from my father, and cancer is one of them. But it's not, how I put it in the book is like, Algonquin Park's one of the most beautiful places I have ever been. And there's this terror that's built into it too. It's there and you can't pull those things apart. You can't expect that one exists without the other. And that taught me so much about how to live with cancer. I am this person and there's no changing it. And this bear attack has always been something that scared me. And I was really struck by that I was scared of a very remote thing, whereas what should really have been terrifying was my DNA, which was, lingering inside me the whole time.
You write about the fact that there's a wildness inside you. And I don't know if a lot of people with cancer think about it that way, but it's all part of what brought you to this point.
So that was part of I have this impulse to go in a canoe for 30 days and, go out into the wild. And being from, a Canadian from Toronto, I always think of that I have to go north to do that. And now that I can't go in the sun, I have to be more controlled. I've become a runner. And what I do is I go down by the lake and Lake Ontario. So I was out yesterday in my little cleats in the snow.
Minus 24 degrees.
It was not warm. But I used to climb mountains, and that's a little more difficult now. But you go in like minus 25 down by the lake, and you actually feel like you're in the Himalaya somewhere. And I just keep track of the lake and its different moods. I've found wilderness in the alley behind our house. It's in the parks. It's everywhere in the city, actually. And just like my disease and my life aren't separate either. The wild isn't something separate either. So just thinking of the wild as somewhere I can go every day, and that extends to something that's inside me. I mean, cancer is the wild proliferation of cells. And so for me, that's helpful. I can allow for that. I can allow for things that are uncontrolled.
But you also had to allow for a change in the way
Yes.
wilderness looked to you. Now it's an urban exploration that you're doing.
Well, every year it's amazing as I heal. And I've had some setbacks too, but I've found different ways of being. So last year I went skiing in the Rockies in Banff, and it was so cold. It was perfect because I was completely decked out with a hood and everything, and I had really good goggles. The ideal amount of UV for me is none, but I've decided that's not feasible because I'm a human, and our kind, we're awake during the day. So I have some exposure, but I've found more and more things that I can do. It started with the running. I've added in skiing. I have a cottage in Nova Scotia, for example, and all my cousins started swimming with me at dusk. And it was the most beautiful time to swim. I'm not sure why I ever went at noon. So we all meet at the end of the day, just as the sun's lowering. And it's just stunning with the slanted light and the oranges and reds. You feel like you're washed in color, and slicing through the ocean at that time is just gorgeous.
I also love what that says about the support you have from your cousins, your family. And I wonder, your own father had to tell you when you were a little girl about his cancer. What was it like having to tell your boys?
So that was, I remember I told them when I was first diagnosed, and I said I wasn't sure if it had spread. So I told them that I was diagnosed with cancer, but, we don't quite know what the plan is. So I sort of downplayed it a little bit because I wasn't sure if I was going to go into a year of treatment or what our life would look like. And they were quite young. So we just left it there, and they were great through the operation. And I was bedridden for a while, and they both came to spend time with me, and we watched movies and things. And then we kind of moved on. And it wasn't until a couple years later, it was during the pandemic, we had a basketball hoop set up in our living room.
Oh, nice.
Because we had two little boys. But one of their friends' fathers had died. And we were just talking through that, and I was making sure they were okay and that they understood what happened. And I said, well, you can relate to that a little bit because I've been sick too. And my younger son turned to me and he said, oh, but you never had cancer. And I thought, oh, whoops. Like he was young and I was underplaying it. It was a moment to revisit, and I could make it clear. It just made me realize, though, how brave my father had been. And it's one of those moments where you're actively trying to live your life and have a good relationship with your children, and you're also casting back and sort of revising what's happened in the past. And it gave me so much admiration for how my father handled his sickness, and that became a source of strength too.
There's actually a passage in the book that speaks right to that, if I can get you to read it, because it just fits so beautifully. And I also love the concept of ancient glaciers. Who wouldn't?
Oh, yes. Exactly. As I hung on the rope, I knew the glacier was alive around me, groaning, gurgling, and cracking. The ice was ancient, and in comparison, the span of human life seemed inconsequential. I started to come to terms with the death of my dad. Grief doesn't just go, it changes shape and grows. Mine found its scale.
And on that, did you feel a grieving process for the life you had
That's
lived?
exactly it.
Explain that to me and what it felt like, what it feels like to this day, and how do you get beyond that grief of something that had been so much a part of your life?
Yeah, because you're grieving what you can no longer do, because you want the moment where this can stop and then you can turn back and you can go and regain what you were before, your former strength. And what I had to realize was that there was no going back, that I had to become something new and change and go forward instead, and find a new way to enjoy myself in more measured terms than I had before. Writing this book was helpful for me in when I was in Algonquin Park, I started hiking early in the morning. And as I hiked one day, I just sort of broke into a run naturally. And I was in the canopy. It wasn't bad, but I thought, oh, running, that's right. I can wear sunscreen. I can wear my stupid little hood outfits and things. And I can actually be much safer if I, run for an hour or two rather than going out all day.
So you actually learned to live inside the confines that your own hereditary genes had forced you into.
So when I'm writing, there's something called creative constraints, and a lot of creative people use this sort of idea, and I started applying it to myself and my health. So if you have a box of crayons and a blank sheet of paper, it can be, and someone says, okay, draw something. It can be a little hard to know where to start. You have this blank page. But if I say, okay, you have silver, black, and red. Those are the 3 crayons you're allowed to use. Then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, obviously I'm going to have a castle and it's going to be on fire. And, and you start riffing with the constraints of what you have. And I often do that when I'm writing. I'll set rules or, okay, this has to take place over one day. And just give yourself constraints. And when you do that, your mind can sort of start to go wild within those constraints. I started to see myself, so, okay, I've got these limitations and I love doing these things. What can I do that's going to, best match those things up?
So is there a goal? Is there one thing you say, once I do that, I will basically have recreated the things I love the most?
No.
That'll never happen again.
No, it won't.
Wow.
And I think that's partly because I'm a writer. So every book I finish, I just start another. It's just, so there's no there's no end point. One thing that really helped me too was I started thinking 3 years ahead. Longer than that felt too overwhelming. I'm actually coming up to the end of my 3 years that I set, but I just have very simple things that I want to do. I want to go on an adventure. I want to write a book, and I want to see my younger son out of high school. So those are my 3 years, and I'm due in June 2026. So we're coming up on it. I just have them written down, and I like that because then I can focus on what I've accomplished rather than what I might miss.
What's the adventure?
Yeah, I haven't figured the adventure out. I have to get going. Yeah.
Hopefully it won't include a metal canoe.
Exactly. I know. Because I'm writing about James Bay and Hudson Bay. And so I want to go up there. And I'm just trying to figure out the logistics of that.
I think through all of it and through the book, it's so beautiful. You mentioned before your husband has become the navigator of the odd spots, if we can put it that way. How important has that been for you? This is a guy you met in one of those original amazing adventures.
Yeah.
And you've had this beautiful life together.
I think it was about 6 months after I got diagnosed, and I was getting quite a bit stronger, and I was better. And he turned to me and he said, but I'm from California. It was just, this sunny place. So he was a little behind me on the, he was just on support. But it's actually been wonderful for our relationship. I think we're both getting older together, so that helps. But we're both very into cross-country skiing. And so I talked him into trying to go on a moonlight ski. So on a clear night when the moon is full, the moon almost gets, especially against the snow, it almost gets as bright as the sun. It's incredible. You can see very clearly. And because he has this adventurous background, he was very up for that.
I love it. But I love that you're finding ways, like things people should be doing that. I mean, the concept of a moonlight snow ski.
Oh, it's amazing.
Is absolutely beautiful. Yeah. But I don't suppose people think of it, and you've had to.
Until you have the constraint. Right. And this is the whole idea of creative constraints, that it can bring new things that you never thought of before.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Lisa. This was a wonderful conversation.
Great to talk to you.
You've been listening to Carry the Fire from the Princess Margaret, a world-leading cancer research center. If you found this episode meaningful, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. To learn more, check the show notes and share this podcast with friends and family to help create a world free from the fear of cancer. I'm Lisa Laflamme. Thank you for listening.